This is Untapped with ME, and I am ME. And on this podcast, I like to do my two favorite things, and that is telling stories that are true and crazy about me and my life in Nacogdoches, Texas. And I like to drink beer, delicious beer. And so today, we are drinking Hop Unity. It's a special purple edition of Hop Unity. And why is it special? Well, it has a special hops. So hops in beer keep it fresh and foamy. But too many hops and it might taste bitter. This is why some of you do not like IPAs, okay? But this particular beer, Hop Unity, has a hop called Solero. And that hop just happens to create a very fresh and smooth and fruity taste. Let's test it out. Yes, it does. So, hop on down, to the Kroger, that is, and get yourself some Hop Unity Special Purple Edition. All right, woohoo! Let's start our story. Today's story is called The Bear Blew Him Away. It's part of our series called Murder and Crime in Nacogdoches, Texas. This is the story of Kenneth Julian Palafox. Y'all, this story is crazy awful because the victim was tied up with his own, well, we'll get to that later. The murderer killed the father of the woman he loved. And he nearly got away with it simply because of a comb. A comb, C-O-M-B, yeah. He was tried twice. Only 2 criminal cases have been tried twice in the history of Nacogdoches, Texas. The first was Edward Otho Hagen's, which we covered in our first story, The Cat Ate Her Face. Go back and listen to that one, y'all. Nacogdoches, Texas is my hometown. How would you like to be a little kid and have to pronounce that name? I can always tell if someone is not from Nacogdoches because they will say, I live in Nacogdoches. Nacogdoches. Nah. If you are from Nacogdoches, you say Nacogdoches. Nacogdoches. In Nacogdoches in 1975. We were drinking Cokes in bottles. You should drink more water, said no one then. Okay, it was all Coke. We were talking to friends on a phone with a big bottom and a thing called a receiver that was connected to the big part by a cord. And the whole thing was tethered to a wire in a hole in the wall. Our definition of mobile then was seeing just how far that cord could be stretched. At Stephen F. Austin State University, the local college, 1975, you know what they were doing? They were streaking. That is, they took off all their clothes, and I do mean all, and they ran across the campus as fast as they could. That really sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah. So, 1975, I was 12 years old. I was in the 7th grade. My hair was really long and really blonde and really bushy. My sister called me Sasquatch. Yeah. On September 6th, 1975, Nacogdoches, Texas. It is 10 p.m. in Melrose community. Earlier that day, it was hot and crispy, and yet also moist and drippy. But that evening, there is the whisper of a little wind in the tall pine trees. It reminds me that a reprieve from the heat is coming soon. You can get to Melrose from downtown Nac in 15 minutes, but you are going to feel like you are way out in the country. Most people out there then were living on dirt county roads, like Paul D. Box. He is on the phone at 10:11 p.m. on this day with his wife. She is visiting her sister in Houston. She will not be back until the next day. She had also tried to call Paul at 9 p.m. Why call twice like that late at night? Was she worried about him for some reason? Earlier that day, Mr. Box said to Mrs. Box before she left, "Find Karen." That was their 18-year-old daughter. He had not heard from her in a while. He was worried about her. Paul Box has been strong, tireless, fearless, the kind of man that builds his own fences, the kind of man that tells his daughter's boyfriend that he is not good enough for his girl, okay? Paul Box did not expect to have a daughter at all. Nope. He had raised 2 sons and they were grown. He was done. But there was this woman, Reba Charles. She was 17 years younger than him. She was 26 and he was 43. And she had just been widowed. And she had a baby too. But Paul Box was all in, even later giving his last name to the boy. 8 years pass. Paul Box is seeing his future as a family of 3. But in 1956, Reba Charles has an announcement to make. She is having Paul's baby. Paul is 57 when Reba Karen is born. They call her Karen. Well, not really. I'll be using fake names for some people still living, so we will call her Karen. In 1965, they all come back to his hometown of Nacogdoches, to Melrose community. Karen, at 16, looks like president of the student council or head of the cheer squad. Pixie cut, big brown eyes, a wide toothy smile. But all Karen wants to do is to marry her boyfriend. There are a lot of reasons why Paul Box is not going to let that happen. 1, he has long hair. Okay, it's the 70s. Some people weren't cool with it. 2, he is 24 years old, a grown-ass man. And Karen is still a girl in high school just learning how to drive. Oh, and also, he is married. Yeah. And the records indicate that he has a child, y'all. So no, this is not going to happen. Except that it does. Yeah. 2 years pass, and so now it is just after 10 p.m. on September 6th, 1975, way out in the country. Paul Box is not well. He is 75 now. He has had pneumonia. He is 5'7" and only 121 pounds. And he is alone on this night. And that is when there is a knock on his door. Paul's brother finds him the next day at 1 p.m. On his bed, face down, his arms tied tight behind him, his feet tied too. You know what he was tied up with? His own neckties. He was tied up with the same neckties he wore to church and weddings. That's some crazy poo-poo, y'all. The walls of the bedroom are speckled with dried blood. That would be from the shots to the back of his head. The house is a mess. Drawers dumped on the floor, furniture turned over, the phone off the hook. Mrs. Box will soon confirm that a lot of things are missing. 2 guns, a radio, a television, a wristwatch, and more. Clearly, this was a robbery. There is an open box of cartridges by the front door and a rifle on the porch. Did Mr. Box respond to that knock on the door that night because he knew someone was there who shouldn't be? There is a clue. An afro comb is found on the floor of a guest bedroom. Still clinging to it are several strands of curly black hair. In the 70s, we called that a pick, y'all. Young black people would grow their hair out and use the pick to push the hair out further. The bigger the fro, the better, we said back then. Well, that did not belong at the Box house. So whoever did this was black. And there was another clue. A cigarette butt in the front yard with some marijuana in it. So police are looking for an armed black burglar who smokes weed. One problem. There are thousands of black people in Nacogdoches, Texas in 1975 with fros. And it's the 70s, and a lot of people are smoking weed. So that investigation is some crazy poo-poo. The police call Mrs. Box to inform her that her husband is dead. And Mrs. Box calls Karen. Now, what has happened to Karen? She married that boyfriend 2 years before in 1973. He is a very good-looking man. He could have what he wanted. He wanted Karen. She is a bit of a redhead, like his mother. He wants 16-year-old Karen so much that he divorces his wife at the top of October 1973. Then, 2 weeks later, Karen is Mrs. Kenneth Julian Palafox. The Palafox family was a really big family. Kenneth had at least 5 siblings. His brother Danny, not his real name, wrote, "Mama was working 2 jobs and we was dirt poor." But that's not how things started. They were once doing really well with a nice home and all the things a family could want. The father was a civil engineer. He worked for an oil company. He was from Mexico. The mother was from Nacogdoches. Cecile, the mother, was movie star beautiful. When they marry, he is 35. She is just 25, a young widow. And then came all those children. They lived in Brownsville, Texas, for at least some of the time, just 160 miles from Mexico, where Mr. Palafox worked. And then one day, I am told, Mrs. Palafox found out that Mr. Palafox may have had other interests in Mexico besides their family. He left for those interests, and Cecile was alone with a whole lot of kids to feed. That's some no good crazy poo-poo. In her despair, she put the children in an orphanage. They had no padre, they had no madre. They may not have even had each other. Some of the children may have been too small to remember. But Kenneth, he would remember the loneliness and abandonment and fear. When Cecile came back for them, she brought them home, her home, Nacogdoches, Texas. Still, they were so poor. So Kenneth did the only thing he knew how to do to be a man for his family. He resolved to go into the United States Marines. But he was only 17. To enlist, he would need his mother's permission. Well, Cecile did not want to sign. This was a horrible time to join the military, y'all. The United States was at war. Sons and brothers were dying every day, 8,000 miles away in the jungles of Vietnam. Cecile could not protect Ken there. But what were the alternatives? Danny wrote, he was only a boy, and only 17 years old. Mama had to sign him over. Kenneth serves 18 months in Japan, and all that time he sends money home to his mama and his siblings. He was so proud that he could do that. Danny wrote, the only comfort to him was the Marine Corps. Well, it gave him a home, a brotherhood, money. His family was so grateful to him. He was their hero. Danny wrote, I loved my brother and wrote him every day. He was a bad mother-ucker. Yes, I said bad mother-ucker. My grandboy listening to this podcast, y'all, so yeah. So Kenneth survives the war. He came home in 1972, but in a way, he did not survive. When Kenneth comes home, he is not what he was. He is consumed by unrest, anxiety, insomnia. His wife claims he throws one of their babies against a wall. Today, he would likely be diagnosed with PTSD. He would be on the right meds, and maybe everything would be all right. He spends the first half of 1973 in the Veterans Administration Hospital in Houston, 215 days. He has just gotten out of the hospital that summer when he meets Karen. They're always fighting. Her friend remembers that she would go home to Melrose, tell her daddy that Ken is awful. She and Ken make up. She tells Kim that her daddy is awful. She goes back to Melrose. Repeat. One day, when Karen has come home to Melrose, Mr. Box takes Karen to the Nacogdoches County Courthouse, and he sees to it that she files for divorce. Someone Ken knows sees them there. He tells Ken, but there is no stopping it. Karen Box and Kenneth Palafox married in October of 1973. They divorce in October of 1974. But what was worse, y'all, so much worse, is that just weeks later after the divorce, Karen Box Palafox marries someone else. That is what the records indicate anyway, and that was a tipping point for Kenneth. But he doesn't hurt Karen. He doesn't even hurt Mr. Box. He tries to hurt himself. That following January, he is in the Veterans Administration Hospital again. He will be there for 6 weeks. Yep. A neighbor to Mr. Box once told him that he saw what he thought was some crazy animal running around Mr. Box's property. The animal was running so aggressively, so erratically, that he thought it was this wild animal, maybe even a bear. But it was just Kenneth. It was just Kenneth running wildly in nothing but a pair of shorts, his chest bare, his face strained, his long hair flying behind him. He really was like a bear. Wild, untamed, so much turmoil beating beneath his chest. So much anger for a world that had hurt him and the mother he loved and that took his Karen from him. In that brief moment, while he runs, uninhibited, unrestrained, he can breathe. He is free. But in 1975, Kenneth Palafox is not free. On September 8th, 1975, Kenneth Julian Palafox is in jail. Now, this is the day after the murder of his ex-father-in-law, Paul D. Box. Even as the body is first discovered by the brother and longtime law enforcement officer Roger Dudley, Kenneth Palafox is sitting in the Nacogdoches County Jail. He is not there for murder, y'all. He is there for threatening someone at a party. Kenneth was doing a lot of partying the night before. There was the party at the Hillcrest Apartments on Douglas Road, where he was the manager. Then the party at the Villas, at the apartment of someone named Bulldog. Then back to the party at Hillcrest until 3 in the morning. He is partying with Dean Melandis. Dean is just 19. Kenneth is 28. Kenneth wakes up around 11 a.m. the next day to a loud knocking at the door. It's the cops. And he is not surprised because when he and Dean Melandis had returned to Hillcrest for that late party, they were just returning from Melrose. Yeah. Okay, so the jig is up. Except that it isn't. They take him to jail for threatening someone named Gary, whoever that is, at the party. Meanwhile, regarding the Paul D. Box murder, Nacogdoches law enforcement is very busy looking for a black man with an afro who likes to smoke pot. But the whole time, the murderer is sitting in the county jail. Now that's some crazy poo-poo, y'all. Ken had said to more than one person that he was going to blow Mr. Box's it away. He had said it to his friend that he was going to get Mr. Box back for what he done. And now Mr. Box is dead. Because Ken killed him. See, that night, Kenneth had decided that Mr. Box should pay for taking away the one person he really loved, Karen. He had a new Ruger .22 pistol. It reminded him of the gun he used while he was in the war. He showed it off to his brother by shooting it in his apartment, into the ceiling, right above his brother's wife's head. And now that gun is hidden under the refrigerator of the apartment of Kenneth's girlfriend. Around 7 p.m., Kenneth has unexpected guests to his jail cell, and they are the aggressive and intense Chief of Police MC Roebuck and legendary Sheriff John Lightfoot. And they know what Kenneth did. They know because he said to two friends, Danny Stilley and Sam Peliquin, in two different instances at the Hillcrest party around midnight, using these exact words, I blew Mr. Box's it away. They want a confession. Roebuck and the deputy who took the confession say that Ken was read his rights. He was asked if he would like to call his attorney. That was Roddy Willis. He had just been in Ken's cell to talk about the threat charge. He had only minutes before left the building. But we are told that Kenneth refuses counsel. Now, why would he do that? At 9 p.m., he tells everything, y'all. Next time, we find out what happened when Mr. Box opened the door. And why is this afro comb going to have so much to do with whether Ken Palafox lives or dies? So subscribe and follow and tap in to Untapped with ME.